Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to another Managing Your Small Business Beyond the Pandemic webinar. This is number 70 since we started back on March 18th, 2020. Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Bearden and I'm your host today. I'll be the sole presenter for today's webinar. I'm the director of the CSU Bakersfield Small Business Development Center located in downtown Bakersfield. This will be the one webinar we do each month where we try to do a deep dive, where we jump into the numbers, show you a lot of the things that maybe you're not aware of, and maybe the things that are harder for you to find, but really the numbers that are out there and the numbers that kind of get beyond what we're talking about with the pandemic. And then also our deep dive includes going through forgiveness and some of the other issues and some of the real relevant items that are not so much focused on recovery, but are focused on getting through the pandemic as far as the filing, spending the money properly, knowing what you need to know about the relief programs in more detail. So today, at least where I'm located, it's dry and hot. And for many of you out there, it's dry and hot and potentially smoky. So just hot and dry, nice little drought weather that we're experiencing. Not too happy with the drought, but I don't think there's many of us out there that are. So hopefully get by with some good air conditioning and some good air quality with these fires that are now starting to burn in California. The Shuttered venue grant is still open. I got a great story that I just heard a few minutes ago to share with you in a little bit, and we'll get to that. Talk about the Shuttered venues. Also have a lot of detail in our deep dive, which gives us this chance to jump into more detail and more numbers than we usually do with our outstanding guest speakers that are usually with us. So we will get into a little the Shuttered venue. Also, we're going to get into the PPP forgiveness. Applications are due soon in the application process. Kind of figure out what's going on with you as we start to spend our PPPs down, get to the end of our covered periods, look at our lenders and say, hey, what's going on with PPP 2020 or PPP 2021? We're going to put the Restaurant Revitalization Program to bed today, and we'll put it to bed in a big way. I think we have a lot of different angles to cover that from today. Number one, the SBA will be shutting down the the Restaurant Revitalization Fund portal today. So if there's any information that you wanted out of your portal, your access, I'm not sure if it's for those that were not funded. Potentially those that are funded still could have access, but I know that they're going to be closing that particular portal, and we'll keep you updated on for those that were fortunate enough to receive one of those grants. So we're going to look at the restaurant revitalization, maybe look at some awards and some things like that that are kind of out there as far as transparency and for public consumption. So the EIDL just keeps on keeping on. You hear more stories each week about people utilizing the EIDL program. I'm not going to get into a great deal today about the Kern County economy and challenges. Covered a lot of that last week, but it's a topic that we always are going to look at. It's the Kern County economy, where it's going. Really, what's happening throughout Kern and some of the other areas, and the challenge this week, as I come up with my weekly now challenge for our economy, is the minor one, I think, and that is just that we're starting to see an uptick in positivity cases with COVID and starting to see more cases. Now, true, in the last 3 weeks, they have doubled, but it shouldn't raise a great deal of concern yet because of the vaccinated population. And also, the reports out there are 100% of the cases right now are going to those that are not vaccinated. Probably didn't need to hear that, probably could figure that out on your own. 100% of those cases that are coming for COVID now, of which in the last 3 weeks have doubled than the level from 3 weeks ago, but nowhere near the proportions that we had to close our businesses. But maybe just something to keep an eye on, and I'm going to keep an eye on, especially if you have a large number of customers who you feel are not vaccinated. So there could be some additional precautions if this worsens coming down the road with the other variants and some of the things that are going on. So we will discuss, a relief program we mentioned last week. We'll get more information on. We will get your questions. So if you have questions today, please go to our Q&A box. Hit the Q&A box, jump in there, put your questions in there, and we'll have time at the end of today's program for your questions. And also a simple poll today, just a little simple one, not a fun one, just kind of a little basic information poll that we're going to do. And it's just going to be based on, again, something that we have done with forgiveness and trying to keep tabs on individuals that have gone through the forgiveness process for 2020. And also some questions related to your 2021, either first draw or second draw PPPs. So let's start with our first question, and it's one we've asked before, and it just simply asks if you were fortunate enough to receive a 2020 PPP, and that was when the program closed back on August the 8th of 2020, have you filed for forgiveness? So we will launch that poll and put it out there. If you have a 2020 PPP, have you filed for forgiveness? So jump in and vote, and we'll give you a few moments to jump into that. We already have over 40% of you that are in, so that's a good, up to 50% now. And I think the numbers are trending fairly consistently with what we're seeing on a national level. So give you another second or two to jump in. And we'll end this poll very simply. If you received a 2020 PPP, have you filed for forgiveness yet? And let's share those results with you. And we have, with 75% of you, 3/4 of you, yes, you have filed your forgiveness for 2020. And 25% of you have not. So it was kind of interesting. A lot of the rules changed after people had already filed for forgiveness that could have affected your ability to get the earned, or excuse me, I do this frequently, the employer retention tax credit. So that's good to know that 3/4 of you are done. Starting to come up on some really important timelines, depending on when your covered period ended. We will talk about that later, but 3/4 of you that have the PPP for 2020 have gone through that forgiveness process. So let's go to poll question number 2. And number 2 is, if you receive PPP for 2021, have you heard from your lender that they have begun the forgiveness process? So if you have a 2021 PPP, either first or second draw, has your lender began the forgiveness process? And it's either yes, no, or you're not sure. So again, there's been no new guidance on this. So we're still looking at PPP 2021 being similar to 2020. We do have 60% of you in now that have received 2021 PPP. And give you another second or two, and we'll end this poll right now. And we'll end this poll and share the results with a dead heat between yes and no. So roughly half of you know that your lender has begun the forgiveness process for 2021 loans, and half of you are aware of, or 44%, with the remaining 13% not sure. Now, I like how that rounded. It rounded up to 101%, doing some quick math here, so that's interesting. So there you go. There's the PPP for 20 and 2021. We'll do one last poll question. I think we have one more up here that, again, not whimsical, not fun, but important. And the last poll question of the day is going to be, and this could be either for your 20, and it could even be contradictory, but it's for your 20 or 21 PPP. And it's just a simple question on, do you anticipate 100% of your PPP to be forgiven? So are you looking, have you already filed, for those of you that filed last year and those of you that anticipate, you've spent the money, and 60% for wage, for payroll cost. So do you anticipate that 100% of your PPP will be forgiven, a yes or no. And we are up to 61% of you voting and still coming in. So 65%, I'm holding out here. I'm holding out and you'll see why for a second. 68% of you have voted. Gives me a chance to maybe get up to 70. And there you go, 70% and a drink of water. How could life be any better than that? So we're going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. And this is why I was holding out. 100%. Anticipate 100% of your PPPs will be forgiven. Yeah, that's turning the PPP loan into a PPP grant. Outstanding. Okay, so we did run into some situations earlier where people were not going to be able to have 100% of their PPPs forgiven. They knew it going in. I think a lot of that was kind of tied to potentially, it was really kind of tied to supplier cost, and they really needed to pay suppliers. And remember, initially when this program came out, it's been adapted, it's been changed, it's been altered, the rules have changed. Again, I've never seen a program that's been more beneficial for procrastinators. Just sorry I couldn't have participated. So thank you for participating in the polls. Our first 100% poll, how about that? So we will now close this and move on. So, which is not always easy to say as it is to do. Which brings us to kind of our sheet that is kind of a regular feature. This one right here, we go. A little trigger happy here. And it's going to be a status or action on our key stimulus programs. So as you know, our first draw PPP for 2021 is closed. If you haven't already spent your funds, plan to spend it accordingly to get full forgiveness. But I don't need to tell you that. You just told me you're getting 100% forgiveness. So the same thing if you have a second draw with a 2021 PPP. You know that it's closed and you've planned and spent your money accordingly and you're going to get full forgiveness. So let's move to number 3. And we're starting to get into a little bit more fun areas here. The venues, the Shuttered Venue Grant Program is still open. It is a total program of $16 billion. It is not fully spent yet. Really kind of, you've heard us talk about it being one of the most difficult grant programs SBA has said they have ever administered. And for those that got in early, got in very early on the first day and waited through grueling months of a difficult decision-making process, but were ultimately, the ones I've talked to, rewarded with a grant at the end. So that's all well that ends well. But let's, Shuttered Venues, let's jump into, let me do a new share here. And let me kind of jump into this. And this is something that came out, and that's not what I was looking for. That's not looking for at all. I was looking for our Shuttered Venues. That's not the PPP forgiveness. And Excel likes to do this to me where it will show me, or excuse me, Zoom will show me a couple of Excel files and will only allow me to open one. So we will come back to the Shuttered Venues. But what I want to do just real quickly is, well, I'll share you the information. And then if after we go through this information, hopefully we can close this. But just, you know, I know better than this than to try to open 2 forms. So let's maybe try this instead. There. Go to the share. See if we can outsmart, there we go. See if we can outsmart Zoom. And for the first time in my life, I've done that. So what this is a detailed list of awards for Shuttered Venues. Today, I will be sharing with you both the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant and the Restaurant Revitalization Programs. And this is for the state of California, which, you know, I like the state of California usually, but I'm going to go up here to Bakersfield. And there we go. And just share with you kind of where in Bakersfield, the 5 award winners that we had. And at the top of our list was the Bakersfield Music Hall of Fame, just a fantastic downtown venue. Glad to see that they were able to participate in this, as their venue has been shuttered, bring some great live music to downtown Bakersfield. Another live venue operator that operates under the name of Monterey International Promotions, Inc. Actually, I believe that is now called the Spectrum Amphitheater out on Stockdale Highway. The Ovation Repertory Theater, LLC, which I should have really figured this out, because since they aren't doing business as names, but that could be the Stars Theater that kind of wraps around Chester 19th. I hope so. Great venue, downtown theater, great theater. The Fabulous Fox Theater in downtown Bakersfield was another of the live venue, and then we had a talent representative. And those are the sole 5 awards for shuttered venues as of Monday. Really a program that still has money. I still think there's opportunity when you kind of go through this list, and we will get out a listing of this. We'll send you this. We'll send out a copy of this webinar like we have done in the past. Our producer, Marina, is on vacation, so she's not participating in the chat today. And she's the one that handles all these great details, but we will try to get this out for you. But let me give you some of my observations in going through this list in preparation for today's webinar. Is that I saw again, we focused on this being kind of an area, and let's go to another area in our region. Let's go to Fresno. Fresno, as you can see, had more. They had twice as many. They had 10 successful SVOGs. 3 guys playing the blues. 3 guys playing the blues. I like that. Congratulations on getting this award. And if anybody knows 3 guys playing the blues, and I love the blues, they want to play the blues on Webinar Wednesday, this is your official invitation. 3 guys playing the blues, do a song for us. But there are some other ones that you see in here, but really, other than really in Bakersfield and in Fresno, I see no museums, and I think that there's still an opportunity for museums. And maybe the reason I'm saying that is because, breaking news right before the webinar started today, I received a text from one of our longtime listeners who runs a museum on the Eastern Sierra, fantastic place, the Laws Museum. And they had applied on Monday and were notified today that they had received an award. So congratulations to them. Fantastic news, but it just goes to show you what has happened with Shuttered Venues Operators Grant. A very overwhelming process, potentially, it looked like for SBA at the beginning, long waits, and now that they've worked their way all the way through that list, now if you apply, you get notified in 2 days, and if you have a successful application, a 2-day notification window, which is just phenomenal. So I love good news. That's great news. So I'm in a good mood this webinar. Wow. I like every other one. So that's just what's going on. But one of the things that I noticed is when you hit the major cities and you start getting into, let's go to Los Angeles here, since we're still in California, and you look at the award sizes over here on the left, you see a lot of museums. There's the Grammy Museum, for example. It's funded to $1.5 million. You start seeing a lot more museums and larger museums that were funded for large amounts, in addition to the theaters, the live music venues, and other. So, just anybody, particularly in Kern and Mono County, but if you're out there from somewhere else, there's still an opportunity for you in this Shuttered Venues grant. So glad we were able to share that. Glad we were able to share great news on the program is still open and is still assisting some venues that have been shuttered. So the process, portal is still open. That's where you go. Okay. So do another little share back here. I think you just saw a little bit of my next share, which is going to be with the Revitalization Fund. The awards are now, because remember, all of this is public information, your PPPs, your IDLs, it's all full disclosure, transparency. The awards are on the internet, and so this is why we go through them. It's open for anybody who can get out there and look at it. But it kind of gives you an idea. For us, it gave us an idea of an opportunity with museums, and already had one take advantage of it this week. So you can't do that with the Restaurant Revitalization Fund unless it is reauthorized by Congress, and we don't anticipate that. So it is closed, and again, the portal is closing down today. And just to give you that reshare back to where we were there. And this is basically the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and the businesses that were funded. The information that it'll give you, see, for those of you that are on the coast, there's your San Luis Obispo businesses, but yeah, a little partial of Bakersfield. So here we are. In all, I believe, let's see, we started, I believe there were about 60 businesses funded, I think 57 actually that I counted, out of the 100,000 plus, which it's a little less than I had hoped for, obviously. I know people that got in the first day and did not get funded. And just, I'll save the editorial comment for another day potentially, or maybe I'll just keep my mouth shut. But anyway, here's what we have. Obviously, this list is not going to include many of my favorite restaurants in Bakersfield, and I'm disappointed for that, but I'm happy for the ones that were awarded. So just the information is the date they were funded, the name of the legal entity. So a lot of these, again, are going to be legal entities, LLCs or Incs, rather than the DBAs of that particular business. The address is provided, city, state, and zip, and then the award size. And then it gets into some other factors here, that including congressional district, so forth. So just going down the list quickly, I did sort it by zip. This is a huge file, and so I sorted ascending by zip, so that's why it does this way. But here are some of the restaurants and bars and other bakeries and establishments. Some of them are, some of my favorites, and some of them are ones that I've yet to frequent. And then I can tell that there are several of my favorites that are not on here. So anyway, that is public information, and that is available. That is available on the SBA's Capital Access Department, Office of Capital Access, and can be sorted by any zip code, and has all the 100,000 plus award winners that were given. So there you go. There is that. Just because, I'm going to move around just a little bit up here. Just because on the day it opened, I believe it was May 3rd. It opened on May 3rd, the portal. And I was traveling to the Eastern Sierra for the first time in 15 months to be in Inyo and Mono County, two counties that we serve and are proud to serve. And I was asked to join a Mammoth Lakes Chamber of Commerce meeting that they have for their restaurants, and we talked a little bit about it then. Some of our other territory, there's one in Mojave, some in Bishop, one in Bridgeport. We get into Mammoth Lakes, and they had a smaller turnout than normal. Maybe there were 15 people on the call, and most of them had applied. And as we see with Mammoth, it looks like they had 4, 6, 8 awardees. And there was definitely more that got in on that. So it seems like it's going to be a consistent theme, that even if you applied the first day, it was probably a time-stamped thing, because this was first in, first awarded if you met the eligibility requirements. So there you go. Okay, so enough of that. And full disclosure, a little more than you maybe bargained for today, but that's what you get here. So the Employee Retention Tax Credit, I'm not going to show you a list of the awardees yet. Someday, potentially. Right now, that program is still open. It is open for 2020. We have final rules and regulations through June 30th of 2021. Again, I looked for final regulations so we know how to treat that. I would definitely talk to your financial advisor on this particular subject, your accountant, your CPA, legal, your SBDC consultant. Your SBDC director will tell you this right now, is that if it was my business, what I would be doing is I would be looking to utilize the full 40% if I have a PPP to try to utilize the 60% for payroll, and then any excess payroll that I have, use that for the employee retention tax credit if I am eligible. That is what I would do. EIDL loan is open. It is scheduled to end on December 31st, 2021. Now, we really haven't gotten into a lot of the numbers here. We do have the numbers up there, but I don't think we'll jump into that today because I want to save plenty of time for PPP forgiveness. And because we haven't gone through that in a little bit. But again, you can request an increase in your EIDL. So please look into doing that. We do have numbers on EIDL. The one thing I don't know about EIDL is that since you can now increase from $150,000 to $500,000, if that is going to eat through those particular funds, and then actually make it so we run out of money before December 31st. We'll try to look into that, but I think everybody who's wanted an EIDL has jumped in. The portal is open. It is going relatively quickly and smoothly. I don't know as fast as the Shuttered Operators Venue Grant. Come on, 2 days? Are you kidding me? That might have been less than 2 days. Oh, I'm so happy. So, you know, actually, the EIDL loan, the EIDL advance, EIDL supplemental advance are still going. That is an open process. SBA will email you, and reconsideration is an option if you are declined. Mentioned last week, but we'll mention again, it's worth mentioning, the California Relief Grant Program. Lindustry emailed a lot of the individuals who were waitlisted, letting them know that funding is still available. They're still making funding, or potentially there might be additional monies made available through the budget for the state of California. So keep that in mind, that if you were not funded with the California Relief Grant Program, the opportunity to get funded is still available. The family leave tax credit, I know, trust me, I do have it on my agenda to have this topic discussed before the end of August. Could be gone by then, but again, it's an HR issue. Even though it's a tax credit, you see how I am already about the employee retention tax credit. You know, IRS funded stimulus programs, don't feel so comfortable with. SBA, I have a good comfort level with those. So I'll stick with the SBAs if you don't mind. The PPP forgiveness, obviously it's open. It's open for 2020 and do 10 months from your covered period. We'll talk a lot about that in a few minutes. And then also your PUA unemployment is open for contractors. So kind of covered this in, I think, pretty good detail by going to the awards and looking at a lot of the winners. Again, the thing that stood out for me were museums were funded in larger cities in large amounts, and a lot of the smaller cities, not so much. Now, that might be an opportunity for you. So I know I'm going to reach out to a few individuals and, you know, maybe it's a basics of need, because that is the whole intent behind these programs. If your shuttered venue needs those particular funds and have been dramatically impacted. If you've been able to access as a museum other programs, which I'm sure many have, then you would have that opportunity to already have received stimulus funds and maybe don't need it. So with the restaurant fund, we kind of went through this real quickly last week, but the totals that were out there, women-owned businesses, about $7.5 billion, veteran-owned businesses, about $1 billion, social economic disadvantaged owned businesses, $6.7 billion, and then multiple owners of underserved populations, 2.8. So then that equals roughly, I think around 18 billion, and roughly 10 billion went for first come, first serve, is from what I understand of that program. There are the size amounts. Won't get into that. We knew that there were 278,000 eligible applications, of which, of 278,000 eligible apps, 101,000 were funded, roughly 36%. So, I guess in hindsight, maybe a lot of people shared the belief that I do, that maybe it should have been a smaller cap and a wider pool to maybe share the pain and the opportunity amongst others and more, rather than just making whole 101,000. So, but I guess it depends on your perspective. But anyway, that's what it is. The average deal was $283,000. So those that did not receive restaurant revitalization, you really want to manage your PPP if you received a PPP second draw, and really try to look into that employee retention tax credit. Now that we're up and going, and it's going for the rest of the year, that is something that really could help alleviate some of the pain of maybe not getting an RRF. There's kind of the email that went out that we discussed. The voice isn't working so well today, but unfortunately the drought's not that bad. Still got water in the glass, so that's good. So we've been talking about some of the EIDL changes, and again, the increase in size was a big one, and also where to go if you want to increase your EIDL. It's COVID EIDL increase request with an S at sba.gov. And then you kind of log into your portal, your own particular loan file, your portal, your account. If you were declined an EIDL or a targeted advance, this is the targeted advance email, a targeted advance reevaluation at sba.gov. So that is if you received an email from SBA. And I know that there were some issues with some of these being held up because of verification of some of the taxable information. So if that happened and you were declined, there is a process to where you can get a reevaluation. And there's kind of a few of the processes. We've been talking about that. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk in much more detail. But before that happens, we have the Nano Loan Program. It's funding small businesses from 5,000 to 20,000. It's being put on by Access Plus Capital. Eddie Pellimer has been on the show a couple times, been on the webinar a few times, and we'll get him back to explain this in more detail in the coming weeks. But you can contact and reach out to Access Plus Capital. Okay, as promised, a little bit of information now on forgiveness and get into some of the forgiveness. This is probably a slide that has been well wore out during the 70 weeks, but it is really kind of a good one-slide synopsis of what has happened. It's the one we used back in 2020. So this is why it says, or by December 31st, 2020. So for your PPP for 2020, essentially, if you closed on August the 7th, it ran till December 31st, and that's if you use the 24-week covered period. We're seeing most people that use the 24-week covered period, even if you spend your money before the 24 weeks, when you quit spending the money, you can go from that period on. There's a 10-month window period from the end of the covered period to apply for forgiveness. Remember, if you don't apply, it's a loan. So if you get the money and spend it and go, oh, doggone, I forgot to go through my PPP forgiveness application form, then you have a problem, because you're going to be repaying that loan back in 2 or 5 years. After that 10-month window, it goes to your lender. Your lender will verify your application. They will make a determination on that, and then they will upload that to the SBA portal, and the SBA will actually review it and either give it a yes or a no. And SBA has 90 days to do that particular process. So kind of some of the top 10 things that we've been talking about is, again, remember what the payroll or the paycheck, I love calling it the Payroll Protection Program. See, I think about from a small business owner's perspective rather than an employee. It's something I can't shake, people. But remember the Paycheck Protection Program intent and try to keep the process simple. So it doesn't get any simpler than your 50,000 and under applications that will be done on the 3508S form. And then the 3508EZ, and then finally just the 3508 form. So 3 different forms. We'll glance at them quickly if we get a chance. Remember that since the program began back in April of 2020, there have been 2 really major changes and revisions. There have been additional guidance provided along the way, but there were major changes done on June 5th and also on December 27th. Both of those were legislative acts of Congress that changed a lot of the structure and a lot of the rules of the programs. So those made it more accessible. They made some of the categories, additional categories for expenses that were outside of payroll, and just reduced from overall 75% down to 60%. You're still going to have that 60% payroll that your PPP needs to go for. Obviously, you're going to want to choose your PPP covered period wisely. You're going to have the 60%, as we just mentioned. And again, you're going to want to manage those PPP expenses. So you have some flexibility and maybe can use it for other things such as the employee retention tax credit. So based on your situation, which generally is driven by your actual PPP loan amount, you're going to select the appropriate forms of the 3 forms I just mentioned. You're going to need to gather documentation to support your forgiveness claim. Now, if it's 50,000 and less, you literally don't need to provide any documentation to your lender. You just need to sign off on it. However, you are still required to have that documentation if your particular application is chosen to be reviewed or audited. And it is far easier to do that now than potentially a year or even years down the road when who knows when the audit or review process for these programs will end. So you need to work with your lender or any of your third-party partners in order to, really your lender is the one who always holds the key to this process. Your lender will be the one who will open the portal, will make it available to you, will request that you use their particular format, their forms, their portal. There's 5,000 lenders, over 5,000 lenders, and many of them have different policies and procedures. So if many of you or some of you actually got your PPP1, your 2020 version through a lender and then a different lender in 2020, you could be going through an entirely different process and different timeline. The one thing you're going to always do is you're going to need to certify that your funds were needed and that they were spent in accordance. And this is done under penalty of perjury. So please make sure you have all your ducks in a row before you do that. And there are resources that are out here to help you. So how and when to apply for forgiveness? Again, this is going to be something that's going to be controlled by your lender. As we saw, half of your lenders are already starting to accept the 2021 version of the PPP. So again, you have the 10 months and there's documentation, a lot of different documentation that you're going to need or going to want to look at. Those could include your bank statements, your tax forms, payroll tax filings that were reported, such as your Form 941, your quarterlies, maybe your state quarterly payroll tax reports as well, since those do show the individual wage reporting and your unemployment filing tax that are reported to whatever states you're in. And I think most of you are in California. So any payments, receipts, checks, and those are going to be documentations for things such as employee health, retirement plans. So these are kind of a lot of your payroll ones that are related. So your steps to going through the process are to, first of all, to apply for loan forgiveness. And you need to contact your lender again to make sure you know what your lender is going to require from you. We discussed the 3 forms. If we have time, we'll kind of look into that. Kind of looked at the payroll documentation that you might have or might need. The one thing that is the IRS is putting out a couple of documents that are kind of helping you if you have a question regarding PPP and the employee retention tax credit. So there's a couple of PDFs. We'll try to scare those up. I haven't really looked through those and looked at them, but it is guidance and making sure that you use the funds only for one particular program. Remember, for a large part of 2020, until the very end of the year, you could not even have a PPP and an employee retention tax credit. It wasn't until the end of the year that it opened it up for the 4th quarter that allowed you to do an amended 941 and actually go back into refile for that particular credit for 2020. Moving forward, that credit was going to be open until June 30th. And then earlier this year, it was extended till December 31st. There is guidance put out by the IRS, since the IRS is the one that handles this particular program. So there is guidance on it, but there is not guidance for extending it past June 30th of 2021. So stay tuned for that. So non-payroll expenditures, ideally a 100% program that maybe utilizes some employee retention tax credit would have 60% payroll and 40% other expenditures. And those other expenditures are going to be, a business mortgage interest payment. And again, that is interest. So, a copy of your lender's statement that verifies that. Maybe a loan amortization schedule, something like that. It's some form of documentation that usually works well. Your business rent or lease payment is a copy of your current lease agreement that shows that. And I understand a lot of these lease agreements that I get to see are filled with boilerplate and they're 70 pages. It's almost like they're intended to make people with, like myself, with ADD, very difficult to read. So, but read through those obviously, and you're going to need a copy of your current lease and receipts or canceled checks, verifying those eligible payments that are being claimed. And then also your business utility. Business utility is pretty straightforward. Utilities, you get a monthly statement, says that amount, boom. So non-payroll cost continued, are some of the other ones that have kind of changed late in 2020. Were your covered operations expenditures, which are your copy of your invoices, could be orders or purchase orders that you paid and receipts, canceled checks, some of the other things that are really helpful. So your covered operations expenditures. If you had any property damage during any of the or vandalism or looting that occurred during the public disturbances that occurred in 2020, that is also covered. Your covered supplier cost. And again, this has really been the one that I've really not got a great grasp of and don't feel wonderfully comfortable with. I want some more guidance on this. But according to the SBA, the covered supplier cost or the documentation needed for loan forgiveness are copies of contracts, orders, in effect at any time before the covered period, except for perishable goods, which is going to be many of you. And a copy of the invoices, orders, or purchase orders paid, receipts, canceled checks, blah, 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 account statements that verify eligible payments. So it's really that eligible payments on the covered supplier cost. And the last one is going to be the covered worker protection expenditures. And these are going to be ways that that you used some of these funds in order to protect your workers, but not only your workers, but your customers. And so it could be plexiglass purchases, it could be social distancing, it could be maybe increasing your space in order to social distance. So a lot of things that could really cover is you're covered in worker protection expenditures. And those are some of the non-payroll items that can be used for PPP forgiveness. You know, we had a few questions that were popped up, and so threw them on a slide. So what options do you have for PPP loan forgiveness if you can't meet 60%? Well, all of you are meeting 60%, so we'll skip that question. Can I get a PPP loan forgiveness if I received an RRF grant? And so since forgiveness is unrelated to the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, the answer, of course, is yes. When you got your RRF, your PPP for 1 and 2 were deducted. And so it is being handled separately. So yes, you go through that. You cannot use the same expenditures for PPP forgiveness and for Restaurant Revitalization Fund, one or the other. If you recall, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, if I recall correctly, goes out till March 2023. So you have a longer period of time to use those funds, but those RRF funds for those that received awards must be offset against actual eligible expenditures of the program. What expenses are forgivable if I use a third-party payroll processor? Well, any software needed to purchase and the processing fees for payroll are forgivable, but not any other administrative costs. Okay. You know, one of the big issues with this particular forgiveness, this whole forgiveness picture, had to do with safe harbors for reducing FTEs. Remember when this program came out, there were full-time equivalents and you needed to return to the same level of business and you needed to bring back your employees in order to gain full forgiveness. Well, as the pandemic started out and then it got considerably worse and longer than we anticipated, then what we did was we saw a couple of safe harbors that came into play. And one of them was Safe Harbor 1. If you're unable to return to the same level of business activity the business was operating at before February 15th due to compliance with requirements or guidance issued by a state, federal, or local government. Now that is in part. On the forgiveness form, it will show the entire statement. Please read that. And if you agree with it, you can check the box and you don't have to go through a reducing either the amount of employees you had or the amount of wages. If you had 50,000, it was assumed that you don't have to. If your loan was 50,000 or less, or as I'm going to call them now, the grant, because 100% of you are getting 100% forgiveness. So the 50,000 or less, and then the other safe harbor was if you reduced your full-time employee level between 215.20 and 426.20, and you restored those levels by the end of the year. So again, really so many businesses, but again, not all businesses, because remember, not everybody had a bad experience during the pandemic. Not everybody had a reduction of sales. You know, approximately 20% of the small businesses around the country, by the last number I saw, were essential businesses that were open, or that they might have thought they were going to start off with going through a pandemic, and they actually went through some good times. So keep that in mind as well. Those individuals will need to either do a couple of those things. So jumping back, let's see some of the shares that we have up here. Let me jump back up here and see what's available. Okay, let's look at some of the forms first. And this is going to be the 3508 form with the designation S for small. And again, this is the simplified form. Contact information at the front. And then we jump down into your numbers, your employees at the beginning. And again, since you're not really going to be judged on how many employees you have at the end with this smaller program, the 3508S form, I believe that is just for statistical purposes. But what you are going to have to do is you are going to have to declare the amount on payroll and also declare the requested loan forgiveness amount. And then you're going to have to, as either the borrower, the authorized representative of the borrower, initial to each of those. And by signing below, you make the following representations and certifications. And this can be done either by an authorized representative or by the borrower. And in really one of the great forms of all time, really one-page form, an optional form on providing demographic information, and those that have been around for a while know I would suggest you do this. I think it's good to know and good to have stats and facts and numbers, but then the rest of it is just instructions. Forms don't get any easier than that. The next one was the EZ, and the EZ came out actually before that. You look at the expiration date. This form is it's designed for the long haul, 12/31/2023. So the EZ, again, is going to be somewhat easier, but still it's going to have more information than just signing off. You're going to have to provide, in addition to your contact information, you're going to have to provide some additional information. And this is going to be your payroll cost and some other things. Now, the detail for that was the Schedule A, which is on the last form, because then page 2 is just the same old authorizations and doing the initials for all of these. And I'm skipping over these, but really read through these and make sure you are not signing anything that is not true. And trust me, you don't want me to read all this stuff. So remember the certifications that are being made by your authorized representative, or if you're signing it as the borrower, you are responsible. So this is all that's different about this. And if we could pull up that other form, I can show you in my Excel spreadsheet, but it's just the payroll cost that you have and the interest, rent, and utilities. Add those 4 together, the PPP amount and the forgiveness amount. So it's very straightforward, the EZ form. In the EZ form, then we have the standard form, the what we call the, I think it's a 5-page form. Let's look at it. So again, it starts off the same way as the EZ, but then you have to start making adjustments for full-time equivalents and for salary and hourly wage. Now, this is necessary that you go through this for those that were over $150,000, if I recall. And so you can do that a couple of different ways. Is you can actually do the calculations for full-time equivalents and salary, or the 2 actual safe harbors that we went through, you can go through that. So there's the signing, and here's your Schedule A that kind of provides the detail for that. And here's the check the box where you can actually use these safe holds where you had no reduction in employees or hourly pay. Or here's the big one that is kind of used by a lot of people that I have seen. And we kind of mentioned that earlier in shorter form. If you're unable to operate because of certain reasons. So check that. A simple check of the box there gets rid of that requirement. Okay. There's the safe harbor number 2 that we discussed also. If not, you're going to need to provide employee name. So a lot of the essential businesses that were open and did better are going to, and our larger size deals are going to need to go through this particular process. Okay, so then the demographic form is on page 5, and then tons of information. Another 8 pages of instruction. And that's the 3 forms. So identifying which form you are going to need is essential. Okay. And kind of stop that share. Go back here to our sponsors. Thanks to all of our sponsors. We get them at the end this time. How about that? And next week, before we get into, got a couple questions we'll get to in just a second, but next week will be number 71. And our special guests next week, I didn't have time to update the slide because you wanted me doing other things, but our special guest will be Alicia Rios. She is with the U.S. Department of Commerce, their U.S. Commercial Service. And she's going to be talking about an exciting new program coming to downtown Bakersfield, and that is going to be an Export Assistance Center. So those of you that export or want to export, there's some great programs that she's going to talk about next week. And whereas we have been served by the U.S. Department of Commerce, U.S. Commercial Service out of Fresno, this will be a new office, dedicated office to Bakersfield. And we'll be talking more about exports next week. So that's our special guest next week. Okay, let's hit a couple questions. And in order to do that, they make me stop sharing. Okay, so let's getting into the questions. Got 2 of them here, if I can get back to them. Okay, it's a long way to get there, isn't it? Okay, our questions. Okay, can I give an example of covered supplier costs? Covered supplier costs are those that I still have an issue with. I'm going to research that and come in next week. There might be more information, but there was something on the covered supplier costs that I recall from earlier sessions that I wanted some more guidance. It seemed like there was some ambiguities in some of the language, at least from my perspective. So I can't answer that question for you. The covered supplier cost I will have next week at the beginning. So I wish to confirm that for tax year purposes for the PPP, it's considered a loan until it is forgiven. So you received your PPP in 2020 until it's forgiven 2021. Well, I will give you my opinion, and then of course I will advise you to talk to your tax professional about that. My understanding is at the end of the year, if it had not been forgiven, that it is considered still a loan since it had not been forgiven. So on your balance sheet, it would be shown as a loan. And then in 2021, it would be miraculously gone if you received 100% forgiveness. So, and forgiven income is the extra part of that. So it would be forgiven income that is not taxable. So another great change came late in 2020 was the fact that the PPPs were not considered taxable income, yet actually at the beginning of the process, they were not considered taxable income, but initially their expenditures were not allowed for tax purposes. That was changed on 12/27. Okay, well, that's it. That's it for the questions. Looks like we're out of here. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week with number 71. Everybody have a great week, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.